Good evening, everybody. Back again. Some of you, I hope, from last week. Those of you who weren't here last week, welcome. Thank you all for being here as we celebrate our second exhibition opening in 8 days, 7 days, 7.5 days, I don't know. I'm Carrie Weber. I'm the executive director of the Fairfield University Art Museum. And I'm so happy you're here on this beautiful September evening. We have a little walk up the hill for the reception, but we've got the patio open. It's going to be beautiful. Before we get to our main event, this evening's talk with Wendy Ikemoto, I have a few thank yous and brief announcements. So sorry, apologies to those of you who were here last week, but I have to say a few things over again. This second exhibition of our academic year is one of 3 exhibitions that we have planned for this year, all relating to the semi-quincentennial. They were all created to help commemorate the 250th anniversary of our country, and they all look at key moments in U.S. history, culture, art, and explore our country's imperfect history and untold stories through the artworks created over the last 250 years. We hope through these exhibitions this year that we will have conversations in our galleries and at our programs about the state of our democracy and what we can do to preserve and improve it as we move forward. This evening, we are all here to celebrate Monuments, Commemoration and Controversy. This exhibition was organized by the New York Historical and curated by tonight's speaker, Wendy Ikemoto. You will be hearing much more about it shortly. It was a great pleasure to work with Wendy and her team at New York Historical, especially Ellen Holdorf and Erin McFadden, to bring this exhibition to our museum. We are really thrilled to have these artworks from New York Historical filling our Bellarmine Hall galleries. Stitching Time, the Social Justice Collaboration Quilts Project, and Give Me Life CPA Prison Arts Program are in our Walsh Gallery. That's what we opened last week. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. It's beautiful, beautiful artwork. The galleries are open till 8 o'clock tonight, so after you've had a drink and enjoyed the Monuments exhibition, on your way back to your car, you can check it out or see it another time. These paired exhibitions highlight racial injustice and celebrate creativity and political activism through quilts created by men at Angola Prison, Louisiana State Penitentiary, and artwork by women currently or formerly incarcerated at Connecticut's York Correctional Institution. These exhibitions focus on people often forgotten by society when discussing the history of the U.S. criminal justice system, and they explore the artworks that they create while on the inside. We have a really full array of programming that I'm not even going to begin to talk about for all of these exhibitions, both these fall exhibitions. So please check it out on our website or on Eventbrite. And the final exhibition, which I just have to keep talking about because it's going to be up all spring and you have to come back again and again, is For Which It Stands. We're going to explore American history from World War I to the present day through the lens of 75 artworks featuring the American flag. It's going to fill both galleries, and there's going to be lots of programming for that too. But the programming for that exhibition starts next week, believe it or not. The show's not up yet. But if you're artistic and you want your artwork included in this exhibition, we have an opportunity for you. Artist Maria de Los Angeles, who we have commissioned to make a textile sculpture for the exhibition, which will incorporate the American flag in her sculpture, is coming to do an art workshop. And she has said that the artworks that are created in this workshop she's going to incorporate into her textile sculpture. Now, I can't promise that, but that's what she said. So don't hold me to it, but that's what she has said. So please, if that interests you, check out the website. It's taking place a week from tonight, September 25th. Final bit of housekeeping. The shuttles will run all night till 8 o'clock, so if you're parked up above or down here, you can just go back and forth up to Bellarmine. And if you aren't familiar with campus, it's an easy walk. Just follow the crowd if you feel like some exercise. A huge thank you to the museum team, Michelle DeMarzo, Megan Pacwa, Heather Coleman, Elizabeth Viano, with special assistance from Carrie Lund for all the work on this wonderful exhibition. and the parts they played in making tonight's opening a success. The talk, as always, is being live streamed and recorded and will soon be available on the museum's YouTube channel for your friends who missed it or if you want to revisit it. We are very grateful to the Robert Lehman Foundation for their support of this lecture. It is the first in a series of 5 talks this year funded by the Lehman Foundation. They form the Edwin L. Wiesel Jr. Lectureship in Art History. Everything we do at the museum is made possible by the generosity of our donors and sponsors, like the Lehman Foundation. And they've been supporting us literally since the museum was founded. I think every single year we have had that lectureship in art history, which is kind of remarkable. But it is thanks to their support and our other donors that we are able to present important exhibitions and exciting and informative program that is free and open to all. If you are not yet one of our supporters, please consider becoming one. Your generosity will provide critical support to our programs while also giving you access to special benefits within the museum. If you have questions about making a donation or joining one of our giving societies, please connect with my colleague, Marie-Laure Cougel, who is right there, and she would be happy to assist you. At this time, I would like to acknowledge a new sponsor of the museum, WealthSpire Advisors, whose generosity has contributed to making the Monuments exhibition and tonight's program possible. I am now delighted to introduce Gail Harris, Senior Vice President and Wealth Advisor at WealthSpire Advisors. Gail has been a longtime member of the Quick Center Advisory Board, and we are so pleased that she has also embraced the visual arts and the work that we are doing at the museum. Please join me in welcoming Gail, who's going to share a few words with you.
Thank you, Carrie. And I know they never build these podiums for someone my size, so I'm going to kind of go off to the side. But as she mentioned, my name is Gail Harris. I'm an advisor with WealthSpire Advisors. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with us, we are a wealth management firm headquartered in New York, but conveniently have an office in Westport and have been long established in Fairfield County. And on behalf of WealthSpire, I'm delighted that we are able to sponsor this exhibit. We are excited to be part of this wonderful organization, particularly in this year as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country. And when I think about our partnership with Fairfield University, I'm kind of struck by how much we have in common, that there are great synergies between our organizations. And that may seem like an odd comment given wealth management and academia, but when you sort of look at our respective missions, you can see that we have a lot in common. So at WealthSpire, we are really dedicated to really understanding our clients, what they need from us, what their goals are, helping them develop a plan to achieve those goals in the future, making sure that we educate them about the choices that they have available so that they make good decisions, and then providing guidance that's rooted in knowledge and their values. And if you think about it, that's exactly what Fairfield University is doing with its students in preparing them for the future. So I thought that that was just sort of a wonderful way to think about our respective missions. But it doesn't stop there. I think one of the other common traits is that when we do our jobs well, we have the ability and the honor of working with our clients, or in the case of the university, their students, staying connected, sometimes for decades and even often for generations. And that is really, really special. And then finally, I think it's this sort of shared interest in the arts and how important the arts are into making us whole people. And that's really the reason and the impetus behind our sponsorship, because we understand that without arts, we can never be complete individuals. And so with that said, we are honored to be here, and we are excited about the programming, not only tonight, but for the whole season. So thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce Wendy Ikemoto. Wendy Nalani E. Ikemoto, PhD, is Vice President and Chief Curator at the New York Historical, where she leads the museum division. She has curated such exhibitions as Lost New York, K Walking Stick Hudson River School, Nature Crisis Consequence, Monuments Commemoration and Controversy, Dreaming Together, New York Historical Society and Asia Society Museum, and the award-winning Scenes of New York City, the Ellie and Sarah Hirschfeld collection. Small note, those of you who saw the Adolf Dane exhibition a few years ago in our Bellarmine Hall galleries, curated by our own Philip Eliasov, should know that one of the finest works in that exhibition was a view of New York from the Hirschfeld collection. Dr. Ikemoto oversees the museum's painting, sculpture, and drawings collection and has spearheaded major acquisitions, including works by Kent Monkman, Betty Saar, Augusta Savage, Oscar Yehu, Kay Walking Stick, Robert Kobayashi, and Livian Yin. She established the institution's Meet the Curator program and helped develop and teach in the Master of Arts in Museum Studies program created jointly with the New York Historical and the City University of New York School of Professional Studies. For International Women's Day 2024, Ikemoto was profiled in the New York Times. She holds a BA in Art History from Stanford University and an AM and PhD in the History of Art and Architecture from Harvard University. Please join me in welcoming Wendy Ikemoto.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here this evening. It's wonderful to be at Fairfield University and at the Art Museum. I'm so excited to be here, and I'd like to express my gratitude to Carrie Weber for inviting me to participate in your Lehman Lecture Series, and also for her interest in hosting the exhibition Monuments, Commemoration, and Controversy. And thank you so much for your support allowing this exhibition to travel here. Tonight, I will, of necessity, be showing installation shots from the presentation of this exhibition at the New York Historical Society, which happened in 2022. So you'll have a chance to compare our presentation with your presentation. And for me, one of the great pleasures of traveling a show is to see the way that it shifts and transforms from venue to venue to become almost a whole new exhibition that is responsive to a new audience, shaped to a new space, and also speaks to new times. So I plan to speak tonight for about 45 minutes, and then I'll take questions and answers if you have them. So monuments are very much in the air these days, and they have been since 2020 and before, but especially since 2020. We saw in that single year the removal of many public monuments, including the one we feature in our title graphic. This is a monument to former U.S. Vice President and slavery advocate John C. Calhoun, and this is his statue being lifted off of a pedestal in Charleston, South Carolina. Then in New York City, the Teddy Roosevelt Monument in front of the American Museum of Natural History was removed in the dead of night behind scaffolding. And there was a monument to Christopher Columbus pulled down by protesters in St. Paul, Minnesota. And then more recently, just this year, the National Park Service announced plans to rebuild and reinstall a monument to Confederate General Albert Pike near the U.S. Capitol. And Kara Walker, the contemporary artist, has taken a bronze sculpture of Stonewall Jackson, disassembled it, and reassembled it into what the New York Times has called a melted mutant grotesque. A tangle of hooves, haunches, bridles, and necks at the parts more or less recognizable, but the whole an entirely new, unsettled being. So there has been a lot of very justifiably heated debate over these and other monuments, and one of the aims of this exhibition is to provide a space to think critically and contextually about this very difficult subject, and more specifically, to show that these controversies that many of us consider so of the moment, in fact have a very long history dating all the way back to the founding of this nation. And that's why we began our presentation with the vandalized statue of William Pitt that you see on the left, set against photographs of monuments and contemporary protests against them. So our aim here was to immediately set up this juxtaposition and draw that connection between past and present controversies, and to give our present controversies the weight of history. So the Pitt statue would have been prohibitively expensive to travel to this show, so it doesn't feature here at Fairfield, but it's a fascinating object, so I hope you'll indulge me as I speak briefly about it. This is a statue that was originally installed in Lower Manhattan by colonists in honor of the English statesman who had helped them repeal the Stamp Act, saying famously in a speech to Parliament in 1776, "I rejoice that America has resisted." As one person put it in some verse, "I thank thee, Pitt, for all thy glorious strife against the foes of liberty and life." So here was this very proud monument to a supporter of the colonists. But then the British took possession of New York City during the Revolutionary War, and from their perspective, during the heat of battle between the empire and her colonies, here was this monument to someone who had helped stir the colonists to revolution. And so while no one knows for sure, it is almost certainly the British soldiers who beheaded the statue and broke off its arms in an act of symbolic execution. Why target the head and the hands specifically? Because Pitt was a famous orator. People who heard him wrote of being inadequate to describe the wonder of his eloquence, of being carried away by the enchantment of words too ethereal to be grasped by mortal touch. And so this attack divested Pitt specifically and symbolically of his capacity for speech and for gesture. This is Pitt disempowered, decapitated, and literally and metaphorically disarmed. And that is the one full statue that we featured in our presentation of the exhibition outside of the gallery. Then when visitors moved inside the gallery, they saw a series of maquettes or models, reductions, and small-scale recreations of monuments. And this smaller scale has an important advantage, and that is to promote critical reflection. Full-scale monuments have a very different relationship to us. They are meant to preside over us, in most cases, to inspire awe in their sublime grandeur, and they share space with us in a very different way. They ask us to move around them and to look up toward them. So the maquettes and reductions shift that hierarchy of scale. They provide this kind of physical distance between us and them that allows for more thought and considered analysis, and also for viewing monuments in context with one another. So the maquettes in this exhibition are arranged chronologically from the nation's founding to the modern day, and each is contextualized with a group of related objects that help to unpack the meaning of each. So we begin with this vignette centered around a small-scale recreation of a monument to King George III that once stood in Bowling Green in Lower Manhattan. The original monument was installed in 1770, and if you know Bowling Green, you know that this monument is no longer there. So what happened is that on July 9th, 1776, Continental soldiers and New York colonists joined together in the Commons, in what is now City Hall Park, and they heard a public reading of the freshly written Declaration of Independence. This is a document that outlined 26 indictments to the king, to a king unfit to be the ruler of a free people who had unleashed tyranny over these states. And they grew impassioned, and they grew emboldened, and they turned down Broadway, and they marched toward Bowling Green with their sights set on this statue of King George III, an imposing statue weighing 4,000 pounds, gilt to reflect the sun, elevated on a marble pedestal 18 feet off the ground and showing King George presiding in his classical robes and laurel crown like an emperor over the colony. And so, as the German-American artist Johann Erdl pictures here, the colonists tore that monument down and the tyranny it represented. This was an act of symbolic overthrow. They pulled the statue from its pedestal. They chopped off the head of the king. They shot it with a musket and intended to put it on a spike in front of Fort Washington like that of a common criminal. They smashed the rest of the statue to pieces. They used their fingernails to scrape the gilding off the lead pieces, and then they carted those lead pieces off to Connecticut, Litchfield, Connecticut, to be melted down and made into 42,088 bullets for use by the Continental Army. The New York postmaster noted that the king's troops would have melted majesty fired at them, and a poet known by the initials of HFG said in some playful verse, "When heated to melting, he sinks in the mold. We'll hold him there still till new shapen and cold. Then off he shall go like a tale that is told in the voice of the thundering gun." So you can see in the exhibition the transformation of the monument into musket balls. This is a small-scale recreation of the statue placed next to a surviving fragment from the actual monument, and then a set of bullets excavated from a Revolutionary War barracks. That tail is one of the signature pieces of the New York Historical Collections, and it rarely travels, so I'm so glad that you're able to feature it here. So the question that this vignette evokes is really one that's constantly being posed today, and that is removing monuments a way of making history or erasing history? On the one hand, you have a removal that harkens back to the ancient Roman process of damnatio memoriae, or the condemnation of memory. This is a scrubbing of people from history, the erasure of them from all public, for the erasure of all public traces of them. And this is a way to expunge them from public memory. On the other hand, the destruction of this symbol of monarchical rule was foundational to and expressive of the making by the people of a new and democratic nation. And by demolishing that monument, the revolutionaries were effectively creating a new one in its place. They left that empty pedestal up in Bowling Green for over 40 years, where it then stood effectively as a monument to revolution and their hard-won liberation. Rounding out this vignette of King George III's monument are two paintings that are about ways of remembering this event and ways of remembering, shaping historical memory. So on the one hand, you have the painting by Johann Erdl on the left, and then the other, a painting by Keith Shaw Williams on the right. The painting by Erdl does seem to celebrate this event, to honor the power of protest, to honor the birth of democracy. It's evening, the sun is setting on a land, symbolizing, the setting of a sun from an empire on which the sun was thought never to set. A fleeing dog suggests broken loyalty to the crown. We have a sense of communal effort to topple this statue down and create a public landscape reflective of a new order. The downward pull of the ropes and the figures that are scrambling from the space in front presage the imminent fall of the monument. And you'll notice also in the background there's a group of colonists who have climbed up onto the top of a matching pedestal in the background. So this is a painting that is tracing the fall of the monarchy, the rise of democracy. But Erdl also looks at those left behind in this fight for political liberty. You see a native family deep in shadow in the left corner of the painting, pushed literally to the edges of the picture, and it is implied out of the frame. Their presence marks this site of this stirring claim to sovereignty as the home of the Lenape people and serves as a reminder of the long history of strategic displacement through war, broken alliances, forced assimilation, and aggressive foreign policy, including the Indian Removal Act executed during Erdel's lifetime in 1830. There's also a black man lying prone on the ground directly in the path of the monument's fall. His presence is not coincidental in this painting. Erdel is somebody who would later support the Union and embed with the Army of the Potomac, and he served as a priest at St. James Episcopal Church in North Carolina and became one of the first people in that area to offer free schooling to African American children and religious services to those recently freed from slavery. So he's painting this scene the decade prior, when the institution of slavery is still intact, but nearly a century after colonists threw off their own political shackles. So he's pointing to, I think, the fact that the revolution was a fight for selective liberty, and he's betraying the core irony of this nation founded upon freedom, in fact perpetuating its own forms of tyranny. Then if you look at the Williams painting, who's missing from this scene? The black man, the native family, women, and children. So no one knows, again, exactly who tore down that statue of King George III that July night, but we know that colonial New York was extremely diverse. So this kind of scene that Williams has painted would have been anachronistic. This is a colonial revival painting, the colonial revival movement being largely a response to rapid industrialization and increasing immigration, a patriotic movement that venerated the early American past and its traditional values and aesthetics. And so what we have here is a painting that strives to remember the nation's founding in a very particular way, a way that upholds white men as the exclusive agents of history and of the nation's founding. And so this comparison from the 1850s to the 1930s is really about how memories of monuments and their histories are malleable and how they become reshaped and refashioned over time. So we've just looked at the nation's founding, and the next vignette is about remembering that this nation was founded upon someone else's land. And in a way, it builds out of that small detail of the native family in the Erdel painting. This vignette centers on a statuette by John Quincy Adams Ward. You might recognize it if you know New York's Central Park because of the large-scale version of the statue that stands there. The statuette, the small version, actually came first. It was so enthusiastically received, so popular, that the sculptor was actually asked to enlarge it in plaster and given the funds to cast it in bronze. And upon its unveiling in Central Park in 1869, that large bronze version became the first sculpture by an American artist to be erected in the park. This is an elegant sculpture. It's defined by these beautiful textural contrasts, for instance, between the two sides of the hide, and also by that long stride and long diagonal of the figure, both of which seem to imply a wider landscape around it. When this work is discussed in the history of American art, it is almost invariably described as an innovation that broke from the taste for classical subjects rendered in a classical style. So we're not looking, in other words, here at a representation of the hunt symbolized by a goddess of the hunt, like the Roman goddess Diana. We're looking at a native hunter and a sculpture based on life studies that Ward made in the Dakota Territory, and a sculpture that is naturalistically described. But if this sculpture is realistic in subject and in style, it is very much divorced from the reality of the situation in the United States in the mid-19th century, and the purpose of the larger vignette is to contextualize that history. So that statue in that history. So we set that expansive composition of Ward implying this larger landscape against a map showing the constriction of native land by the U.S. reservation system. By the time Ward sculpted the Indian hunter in 1860, the United States had seized over 7 million acres of land from native people. That figure now exceeds 1.5 billion, and today's approximately 326 reservations add up to about a space about the size of Idaho. We also set the sculpture in conversation with a painting of the New England Pilgrims by an artist named Henry Boughton. It's a very striking painting with those dark figures sinking into those snowy whites. And it is also a pointedly political painting. Boughton created it roughly the same time as the Ward sculpture in the 1860s, but specifically in 1867 in the wake of the Civil War, when the nation is trying to repair itself from this very deep and violent domestic rift. So he was searching for a national ancestor, a national story that North and South could coalesce around. And what he's offering up is the New England Pilgrims as the moral and spiritual pioneers who are persevering through this harsh winter landscape to practice their faith and to establish a foothold in the New World despite its dangers. There was a label affixed to the back of this painting that read, "Going to worship armed to protect themselves from Indians and wild beasts." Framing that entire vignette are the words of a native poet named Laverne Whitebear, whose verse directly addresses the Pilgrims. It speaks of the invasion of the Dakota homelands, as well as the Pilgrims' oppression of Native people following their own flight from oppression. So here is a recording of Whitebear reading her poem.
Here is a Dakota son who bears a white man's face, and there are their men, women, and children. From where did you come? Escaping, were you? Did you steal respect and honor too? Even our children cast in stone, you stole their stories and made them your own. Porcelain beauties hide children beneath folds of wool, sucking their lips to hasten their will. Is that fear upon your face? Did you not covet this sacred place? The land where children of the stars live, the place where time began. She is their mother, Inamaka. They respect and honor her, none other. Who do you fear? The savages? Oh yes, it's true. Remain afraid, I say, for ignorance requires no skill. As you scurry along the trail, making your prayers without fail, ask yourself this: who should you fear in the lake's beautiful mirror? And do they look like you?
So the title of that poem is Savages, and that is Whitebear's way of upending this racist slur to honor a people who have had to fight for their lives. The third group of objects continues the theme of nation and race by centering the Statue of Liberty, which has stood for decades as a beacon to so many people and a symbol of freedom and opportunity, rising up 305 feet from New York Harbor. Your presentation features both a cast of the statue by the sculptor of the Statue of Liberty, Frederic Auguste Bartholdi, and a drawing of the Statue of Liberty's torch-bearing arm, which actually toured Philadelphia and then New York City as part of a fundraising effort. While the unveiling of the statue was cause for celebration and featured a parade in New York of over 20,000 marchers and drew 1 million people, the streets were lined with bunting, there was also some disconnect with some communities. And the vignette in this exhibition explores that disconnect between the symbolism of the statue and the lived reality that many Americans faced at the time of its creation. So one of the central comparisons or juxtapositions is this comparison or juxtaposition of hands, the one of Lady Liberty holding up that torch, and this black hand emerging from the image of a supplicant enslaved person who is asking, "Am I not a man and a brother?" and breaking his own chains. And this work, the latter one, speaks to the conceptual origins of the Statue of Liberty. We think of it today as a monument to immigration, but when it was conceived, it was actually conceived of by a French abolitionist in the wake of the Civil War to honor the triumph of Enlightenment ideals in the United States, and particularly those realized in Union victory and the abolition of slavery. So an early model by the sculptor, which you see on the right, in fact shows Lady Liberty. It's difficult to see, but shows Lady Liberty holding in her hand a broken shackle, symbolic of emancipation, instead of a tablet. The final version of the statue does still incorporate chains being sliced open by an axe, but those chains lie at Lady Liberty's feet, and you effectively can't see them unless you're flying above in a helicopter. So just imagine how galvanizing it would have been to see emancipation more directly represented when the statue was unveiled in 1886, by which time Jim Crow was seizing the nation, crushing the gains of Reconstruction through the legalization of segregation and violence toward Black Americans. When the celebrated civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois sailed into New York Harbor in 1894, only 8 years after the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty, he described this monument as having its back toward America. And that was an incisive comment, given that Du Bois was sailing on a segregated ship. That same sentiment is expressed in the vignette's framing poem called Fettered Liberty by Esther Yates. It was published in the official magazine of the NAACP in 1916. So here is the excerpt that we have in the exhibition. And this is freedom, this is liberty, the place where justice reigns, home of the brave and free. Look, trace the deepened furrows of servility upon a burdened race. Even if we consider the Statue of Liberty as a monument to immigration, as it's commonly understood, note that in 1882, just 4 years before the statue was unveiled, the United States had issued the Chinese Exclusion Act. This was the first race-based federal exclusion law in the nation and the culmination of decades of brewing anti-Chinese sentiment and violence, including little acknowledged lynchings. That exclusion law stayed in effect as late as 1943, when the U.S. began allowing a quota of 105 Chinese immigrants into the country. And it was in full effect in 1903, when that famous poem by Emma Lazarus, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free," was emblazoned on the statue's pedestal. We added this painting by Samuel Northcote of a Chinese laundry created in 1899 in the wake of the Exclusion Act to tell this story and to prompt visitors to consider that distance between the ideals of freedom and welcome symbolized by the statue and the long history of its lived reality. The fourth vignette moves us into the 20th century, and it centers on a monument made by Augusta Savage. Augusta Savage is not extremely well known today, but in her day, she was a true mover and shaker of the Harlem Renaissance. She was a remarkable woman, born in 1892 to parents who had been born into slavery in the Jim Crow South. She moved to New York with $4 in her pocket to study art. She opened her own art school, which one visitor described as a sanctuary of industry and dreams. She founded and directed one of the largest WPA art centers. She became the first Black woman to open her own gallery, and she became an outspoken and eloquent advocate for opportunity for Black artists, saying, for example, as a woman of color in the midst of Jim Crow, "Isn't it rather odd that people should always suppose that when a colored girl gets a chance to develop her natural powers, it must be that she will want to become white? It gets to be a tiresome task explaining to them that the desire to become better or more capable is a common quality of all human beings." This is a souvenir reproduction of Savage's signature work. It was a commission for the 1939 New York World's Fair, and the only commission at the fair by a Black woman artist. Life magazine at the time actually noted that Savage was one of the few Black people commissioned by the fair to do anything but, quote, pick and shovel work. compare her representation of Black individuals to one of the other World's Fair displays, like Jungle Land, which employed Black Americans to pose as Native Africans. Savage's work was a monument to Black contributions to the world of music, and it was inspired by the song Lift Every Voice and Sing, which had been declared the Black national anthem by the NAACP in 1919. Here is a very short clip of the song as performed by the Harlem Boys Choir. I have to say, when I led a tour of this exhibition, members of New York City Council came through, and I played a little clip, and they all broke out into song, and actually sang the entire song in our galleries. It was a very special moment, and it is a really incredible song. It references protest marches, Let Us March On. It speaks of the violence of slavery, Bitter the chastening rod. It speaks of perseverance despite trauma, treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. It becomes overtly religious in that last verse, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. And it argues for integration, not separation, true to our native land. It's a song that's written in A-flat major, a very expressive key, frequently used in spirituals and gospel music, and that melody carries the meaning of the lyrics. Lift Every Voice and Sing is sung on an ascending line, as is Let All Creation Rise. And then the music takes that mournful turn, minor turn in the second verse, which talks about the dark past and the blood of the slaughtered. So Savage's work becomes a visual manifestation of the power of that song. We're looking at 12 young Black singers in graduated heights. They're compressed together. The folds of their robes become the strings of a harp. They're singing in surround sound with their heads turned in alternate directions. And the kneeling man at the front becomes the pedestal of the foot pedal of the harp. And the sounding board formed by this hand is generally thought to represent the forearm and palm of God, transforming these young singers into instruments of God. The longer that I have been able to sit with this sculpture, I've come increasingly to wonder, given Savage's own foundational role in the Harlem Renaissance and the way that she lifted her community up, whether it could also symbolize her own hand. Savage's sculpture was a soaring 16 feet tall, the largest work that she ever made. You can get a sense of it here in this photograph from her studio. It was placed at a prominent entrance to the fair. It was seen by millions of visitors, but at the end of the fair, it was smashed by bulldozers. And this is because Savage didn't have the funds to store such a large piece, and she didn't have the funds to cast it in bronze. So this is not uncommon for World's Fair's works. Many of them were not made to last, but it was part of this larger pattern in Savage's career. She worked always against these adverse socioeconomic conditions as a Black woman artist during Jim Crow, and she had struggled through poverty since childhood, and only half of her documented work survives today. So the main point of this vignette is to raise the question, what have we lost? Or put another way, what do we choose to preserve? It's very easy to think about monuments as static, as fixed, but they're not. They require upkeep, they require care, and they require funding. And one of the framing quotes near this vignette comes from a Native scholar named John Lowe, who writes, "History is not truth, it's memory, and a part of remembering is considering what we forgot." Next, we have a group by 3 contemporary Black sculptors bearing witness to suppressed histories. And the point of this vignette is to extend that question about whose stories are preserved and celebrated in the historical record, and to demonstrate the new ways that new monuments can change history, the ways they can redirect how and what we remember. So for context, we include a group of works that provide a sense of what these contemporary artists are working against. The group is anchored by this Currier and Ives print showing the hotly contested Emancipation Monument by Thomas Ball in Washington, D.C. This is a monument that conveys a very clear hierarchy between this shirtless, kneeling Black man pleading for freedom from Abraham Lincoln, who towers above and stretches his arm out as if in benediction. What the abolitionist and statesman Frederick Douglass wrote days after the statue's unveiling is, "What I want to see before I die is a monument representing the Negro, not couchant on his knees like a 4-footed animal, but erect on his feet like a man." And Alison Saar work effectively answers that call. This is a direct contradiction to monuments like the Emancipation Memorial in that it centers Black agency in abolition. This is a maquette that Saar made for her monument to the Black abolitionist Harriet Tubman. And as you can see, she likens Tubman to the Underground Railroad. Tubman becomes the train. She strides forward with the force of that locomotive. She's pulling up roots from the ground behind her in a gesture that seems to refer to her own uprooting as an escaped enslaved person, and to her work uprooting the institution of slavery. And her front, her petticoat becomes the front grate of the train, and then on her skirt you can see the faces and belongings of the people that she helped to escape from bondage. The full-size monument is in Harlem on West 122nd Street, and when it was installed there in 2008, it became the very first public monument to an African-American woman in New York City. It faces south to honor Tubman's work as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, her decision to make an estimated astonishing 13 trips back south after securing her own freedom to lead others toward liberty. Next to this work stands a maquette for a never-realized monument by Barbara Chase Rabeau to Sojourner Truth, who had been born into slavery in New York and then escaped to freedom in 1826 to become the great abolitionist preacher and women's rights activist that we know her to be, delivering her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech in Ohio in 1851. Barbara Chase Rabeau's work is probably, in my opinion, one of the most arresting sculptures I have ever had the pleasure of working with, ever seen. I think that it's so dynamic, the way that, and moving. I mean, we see this very emaciated horse, which suggests the long duration of her journey, the weariness that both the horse and she are experiencing. But you see these amazing sort of drips that read almost as claw marks on the side of the horse. But then you have the way that Chase Rabeau has described the dress, the cloak of Sojourner Truth. It imbues her with a sense of billowing and movement and dynamism that contrasts the weariness of the horse. And it also reads almost like facets of armor that have arranged themselves to protect her and lead her toward her purpose. What I hope visitors appreciate is the sculpture on its own, but also the sculpture in dialogue with that other equestrian sculpture in the exhibition. The King George Monument really epitomizes the equestrian tradition, which is historically one that shows white male leaders mounted astride their horses and charging forward. And what Chase Rabeau does is directly challenge that tradition by inserting into it a Black woman who doesn't command or preside over, but instead guides, lighting the way forward with that lantern held aloft through the darkness of an implied night. Chase Rabeau submitted this maquette to a sculpture competition in Truth's hometown of Florence, Massachusetts. It didn't win, so the monument was never realized, but if it had, I kind of imagine it not being elevated on a pedestal, but at ground level, with Truth not dominating and dictating from on high, but pulling us alongside. And then the third maquette in this vignette is by Kara Walker. It stands apart from the others in the entire exhibition because it does not honor a person, it does not honor a hero. It's not about abolition as opposed to the Chase, Roubeau, and Sarr monuments. It instead looks at the ongoing legacy of slavery. So it's a very different type of monument. It doesn't offer us a hero, it doesn't offer us a narrative of heroism, but it confronts us with trauma. This is a model for a large public sculpture installed in 2018 at Algiers Point on the banks of the Mississippi River in New Orleans, where enslaved people were quarantined before their transfer to slave markets. And what happened is that Walker was visiting New Orleans. She went to Algiers Point to look for public recognition of this difficult history, and all she found was a, quote, cheap bronze plaque, one of only 2 historical markers in the entire city that address the slave trade. And so she decided to pull that buried history back up to the surface and raise it up. And she called her monument the Catastrophe Caravan, which in Haitian Creole means caravan of catastrophe. So you can see it takes the form of this wagon. Each side is emblazoned with Walker's signature nightmarish narratives of violence and subjugation. It's a bit difficult to make out, but on this long panel, what you're seeing is an enslaved family getting marched across a field by this monstrous amalgam of an overseer wielding a whip. And then on the other long side, you see 2 captive figures carrying a dead body, while another figure appears crouched above them in the branches with its legs spread apart as if it's about to urinate on the scene. And then inside the full-sized wagon was a calliope or steam organ, which played music inspired by protest anthems and African-American spirituals. The monument and its music were meant as a direct retort to this tourist steamboat Natchez upriver. This was a boat modeled on 19th century paddle wheel steamers that offers tourists nostalgic cruises along the Mississippi River and plays songs like God Bless America and Dixieland. And so what Walker's caravan did was inject the brutality of New Orleans' slave past back into that kind of tourist-friendly history that had been wiped clean of the trauma that the city had witnessed. And that Walker vignette is framed by the second commissioned poem in the exhibition by Diane Xavier, whose aim is really to bring sound back, the sound of the full-scale monument back into this silent maquette. So you'll hear the poem is very rhythmic, it's percussive, and you can see even visually in the red panel there how the words seem to gather and tumble together down the page. You can find in the verse, or you'll hear in the verse, direct descriptions of the silhouettes, references to families being separated, to escape and pursuit, and then the poem ends by describing a jet steel remembrance. That is this monument.
Song for Caravan by Diane Xavier. Me mollusk underfoot, heel, bone to bone, calcium, dust, sound this time, again, salopri, convoy, boot, wingtip, part most distant from belly. This time sound again, they comin', they comin', they comin'. Snarl, lick, chew, bark, swap, mangle, tongue bills, press limbs, count hairs, diameters of heads, muscle promissory note for one's future property. Summon captive, whisper signal. Lashes of slender stems bear curly leaves. This time sound, earth breaks. This time empire wheels. This time cathedral bell tumbles. This time petrol. This time wind. This sound machine. This song hurricane. This mother's cat tied round tree with rope, with lash, with plant without root. This time whistle. This time nostalgia, this time muddy myth, this sound amnesia, this cry, this stem crawling up skirt, this lip, this dusted bone, this sound when it smacks. From throat bass howl for kin, well syllables for those at point. Separated from. Sound cut water make clear intimacies, this jet steel remembrance of yet another.
So you'll notice that the poem sounds almost like it ends on an auditory M dash, like it's not complete. And I think this is Xavier, remembering Walker's monument as honoring its symbol, the way it speaks to this continuing, this yet another tragedy, yet another place of suffering, yet more people enslaved. And then finally, we end the gallery with this empty pedestal modeled after the 18-foot tall one that colonists left up in Bowling Green after tearing down that statue to King George III. And we turn it into a piece of community installation art. The question that we pose to visitors is framed this way: what should stand on a public pedestal? And visitors write their answers on the provided sticky notes and post them directly on the pedestal, creating this accumulation of voices and this forum of exchange, so that the pedestal becomes this place to share ideas and to have that kind of democratic exchange. In our gallery, we received a range of responses. Again, this was in 2022. An indigenous and androgynous version of the Statue of Liberty, monuments to ideas, not people, monuments to human impact, not events, living monuments like gardens. We received some humorous answers like a comfy chair or my wife, paragraph-long answers about how the process of determining such an answer needs to respect community, calls to use pedestals as spaces for performance art, admonitions to never erase history, and questions: why do we need pedestals? So I like ending the exhibition on this question and my presentation on this question: what should stand on a public pedestal? Because it looks to the future of monuments, because it makes the very important point that history is neither neat nor finished, and that we are all, through the making of monuments and through the breaking of monuments, engaged in this long-standing, ongoing, and collective process of writing and rewriting our shared history. Thank you. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. That was 45 minutes. I don't know.
Could you just repeat the question?
Oh, yes. The question was about a detail in the work by Kara Walker, where the body being carried had this gesture, and I'm not sure. I'll try to go through the gallery and ask. Any other questions?
The other picture the picture that went with that. The picture that went with that.
The tall.
The painting. No, the next there.
Okay.
Her. How was that done?
Song for Caravan.
I'm sorry.
How was that done? Was it carved out? The painting?
I'm sorry, that large detail on the wall is just a graphic of a blown up, we blew up one side of the maquette to feature on the wall to really, to just give it more visual presence.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I wanted to circle back and forward, to the end, but you quoted somebody earlier in your talk regarding the taking down a monument as the erasure of history. Is that what?
I quoted John Lowe.
Oh, okay.
Who said history is not truth, it's memory.
Right.
And part of remembering is considering what we forgot.
Yeah, I thought there was something earlier in the talk. Anyway, I was just curious about the question of this taking down monuments, right? Obviously symbolizing protest to the king and all of King George and so forth, but also the question of there's this controversy, and I guess I don't your thoughts on, I guess is what I'm asking for, is obviously a lot of monuments, as you started with the original photograph, right? That all these Confederate monuments, for instance, taken down and so forth. And we can go in all sorts of directions, Columbus and whatnot. I personally don't see it as an erasure of history. I see it as we still know that history. It's what we memorialize, right? It's what we, to your point about elevating these objects. And I wonder if you could speak to that controversy in terms of, we're going to talk controversy of taking statues down, like in our contemporary society. Your thoughts on that in terms of this question of people arguing about erasure of history.
Yeah, I think maybe you were referring to a question that we pose in the exhibition. Were the colonists making history or erasing it? So, I mean, I'm going to go through the lens of history to answer that question so that I, don't inject my own politics into it. But I mean, I think that there are, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. I think there are a lot of different ways that history can be preserved in a way that doesn't maybe elevate. I think the example of Kara Walker taking a monument and disassembling it and reassembling it is a really interesting way in which the physical object of the past lives, but in a different form. This is actually a process that was practiced in antiquity as well. So it's not that we in the modern day have invented that. I know during some of the protests in 2020, monuments were left up, but projections were cast upon them to sort of alter them in that state. There were new monuments built that sort of set old monuments in conversation with them. So I think there are ways historically that people in this country have preserved history have addressed history in a way that doesn't erase it.
Hi, thank you so much. This is a little redundant after that question, but I still want to ask it. So when you're looking at these cities like Richmond, Virginia, with Monuments Avenue and everything, I'm wondering what the contemporary discourse is around either replacing those monuments or coming to some consensus about a unifying monument. Is that going on? And also when you're looking at New York Historical Society and the previous Teddy Roosevelt statue that was outside there, what is going on in a more definitive way with these spaces? Are there conversations happening at the city or municipal level about something more aspirational, perhaps?
Yeah, certainly with the Theodore Roosevelt sculpture, yes, that was addressed. That the museum sits on public land, on city land, so New York City was involved in addressing that statue, and I think it was, I think the museum, the way that museum kept the conversation going even after the monument was taken down, is they put an installation up in the galleries called "Addressing the Statue," and it featured a reproduction of the statue in graphic form and all of these voices sort of addressing it and allowing that cacophony of voices and disparity of opinion to live. And I think some of the voices were looking at again that scale, the monumental scale of that sculpture, and the way it made some of those respondents feel imposed upon. And so this was a way of, reducing that scale and incorporating many voices into the conversation and preserving, the issue instead of just ignoring it.
Just to clarify for people who don't know, that sculpture had Teddy Roosevelt on a horse, and it was in front of the Museum of Natural History, right?
Yes, it was.
And it had an African American sort of on the ground below him, and a Native American on the ground below him. So, yeah.
Thanks. I think there's a societally imposed reverence in public sculpture, and I'm kind of reminded of German iconography of the Nazi era. That was, this is how you're supposed to think, this is what you're supposed to feel, and we are great, and anything that's not us is not good. And I kind of see this country heading in the same direction. No, I'm just pontificating. What do you see?
I am going to demur as a representative of my institution, which is a nonprofit. I don't want to, again, interject my own politics, but I will say, to your point about what monuments do, is I would point to Monuments Lab in Philadelphia, which, based on thousands of surveys, I believe, that they sent out to talk to people about monuments, came up with this definition, or working definition of monuments, is that they are statements of power and presence in public.
And on that note, we're going to end this conversation, but I will say we have 3 more public programs on monuments. So please check our website. This conversation will continue. So if this interested you, we have 3 more great speakers coming to talk about monuments. So, but the bar is open up in Bellarmine Hall, and I encourage you all to come up and enjoy and join us on the patio. Thank you, Wendy.